At first we thought they were spiders. The basement was cold and dark. It was almost a week after we'd moved in. We both ventured down the wooden staircase that we discovered on our first night in the house. There was a switch at the top of the stairs. A single bulb lit the concrete bunker that lay beneath our home. My wife shivered, or perhaps shuddered, and stopped at the door as I took my first steps downward. I've seen basements before, and this was nothing extraordinary. Concrete floors, haphazardly constructed shelving, and a feeling of dampness in the air. The corner of the room caught my eye as I looked around. As I said, at first we thought that they were spiders, ranging from tiny specks to alarmingly large. They gave the illusion of a multitude of legs, and they huddled in one corner of the basement near the ground. When I had reached the bottom of the staircase, I took a few concrete steps towards the spiders. I never felt dread anything like what I felt in that moment. My skin went cold, the hairs on my arms stood on end, and it became an effort to even remain standing. Nausea overcame me, and I took several steps back until my foot found the wooden staircase. That led me back to the comfort of my new home. I took a breath. I embraced my wife. I installed a lock on the basement door. We heard noises at night. The sound of hushed movement, a rustling, and something a little more organic. The sound of limbs, hundreds, thousands of them, flesh moving, grinding against itself in the middle of the night. We worried that our son would not be able to go to sleep, but as far as we could tell, he noticed nothing. About a week later, I opened the basement door on a whim. There was a flurry of movement at the edge of the darkness. I flicked on the light and the spiders scurried. I caught a haunting glimpse of them, scattered in bunches all around the room. The walls and the ceiling were dark with patches of the creatures huddling together, breathing. As the light came on, I blinked. They retreated. Back into the shadows, back into the corner. I gagged at the smell. I've never smelt anything like it. An exterminator was called, but he couldn't even make it down the stairs before throwing up all over himself. He was inconsolable. He wanted nothing to do with us. He told us that it was our problem, that we weren't paying him enough for that. Whatever it was. Things quieted down for a while. We figured that it would be dealt with later if we just ignored it. Kept the door closed. But it lingered, as these things do, in the back of my mind. I could see the basement, see the spiders, and in the night we could hear them. It was getting louder. My wife didn't agree, or at least she wouldn't admit it. I couldn't blame her for denying it. My skin crawled at the thought of the basement and the spiders that inhabited it. I needed to go away on business. I didn't want to go. My wife didn't want me to. Our son cried as I pulled out of the driveway. My wife held him in her arms and solemnly waved, then kissed him on the cheek. I knew it would be fine. They're only spiders, after all. I was away longer than I intended. Negotiations ran long. I spent long nights at the hospital, and long days in an unfamiliar office. On the third day after returning to my hotel room, I spoke to my wife on the phone. Her tone was soft. I could picture her glazed eyes. "They come out at night," she said. I was tired, irritable. "What? Who?" I asked. "It feels good. It feels so good," she groaned, letting out a sigh. I gripped the phone in my hand. I decided to run home. There are more important things in life than keeping a client happy. I decided. I drove home the next morning. It took me half the day. My wife didn't pick up the phone when I called. I felt sick to my stomach. I pulled into the driveway in the early afternoon. The curtains of the bedroom window were pulled closed, and as I entered the front door, I called my wife's name. A soft, gurgling voice responded. "I'm in the bedroom." I apprehensively followed the sound of her voice and pulled open the bedroom door. The sunlight blocked by the curtains barely lit the room in front of me. On the floor lay my wife, naked, pale, shuddering. In the corner of the room, the carpeted floor was decayed. leaving a hole into the basement, from which protruded 3 limbs, black, living, disjointed. One limb had pierced the skin of her chest area, spreading a black rash to the surrounding skin. Dark blood had dried around the wound, and fresh blood poured over onto the carpet. One limb had wrapped itself around her leg and broken it. A bone stuck out at an angle I could barely look at. The third smallest limb had snaked its way into my wife's mouth, where it pulsed. The matted black fur that covered it brushed against her sickly pale skin. Vomit stained the edge of her mouth, the front of her clothes, and the carpet underneath her. The stench overpowered me, and I immediately threw up onto the floor in front of me. The sounds I made caused reactionary movement. The third limb quickly retracted from her mouth, causing blood to well up from her throat and flow out onto her body and floor. This vessel disappeared into the dark mass in the corner. The other 2 limbs moved in unison and pulled her towards their destination in the corner. Her legs snapped again and the skin on her chest ripped further as she was violently wrenched into the wall. The limbs pulled at her in unnatural ways. I watched, falling to my knees, vomit filling my nose and pouring from my mouth. Her chest was torn open and her body folded into an impossible shape as her body was broken and pulled through the rotten hole in the floor into the basement. I cried out, my voice cracked, and through my tears I saw more limbs moving outward from the corner of the room towards me. My hands felt puddles as I pushed myself backwards out through the bedroom door. I scrambled to my feet and moved, dazed, as quickly as I could down the hallway towards my son's bedroom. I couldn't think straight. I could barely see. I threw open the door. My son's corpse lay empty. What was once the body of my child was now an empty shell. His insides appeared to have been sucked dry, a bloody rash covering the parts of his skin near his mouth and chest. His skull had collapsed inwards as though it was the cocoon of an insect crushed by the fingers of a man. I screamed. I stumbled forward and landed on my hands and knees in front of my son. In desperation, I grabbed what was left of him and I lifted it. The arm broke easily, the skin tearing to reveal weakened, rotten bones within. I cried out again, as every part of him I tried to hold, to feel, simply fell apart to the touch. I heard the sounds of flesh moving, grinding against itself from below the room. I noticed that the floor underneath my son had rotted and darkened, and by the time the sound became deafening, the rotted portions of the floor beneath my son's corpse began to fall away, and through the hole I saw limbs, black and matted fur and dead flesh, writhing and climbing in the basement below. Thousands of limbs, fighting with each other, but somehow coordinated, rising towards me, filling the space in the basement below. The stench, nearly unbearable before, at this point overwhelmed me completely. My vision faltered, and I struggled to remain conscious. I stopped breathing. I fell backwards onto the carpet. The jolt awakened me. I don't know how I found the strength, but I crawled. I crawled to my feet, and I ran from the room, tears hindering my vision as mucus and vomit filled my nose and mouth, and I dared not look out into the other bedroom as I continued to run. I swore I could see the walls and the floors of the house slowly rotting, turning black, surrendering themselves to the blinding basement. I tripped and I rolled out the front door of the house, and then I scrambled back to my feet. As I fell, the limbs of the creature brushed against my ankle, and I screamed again and pulled my ankle as hard as I could. The limbs didn't get a chance to grip me properly, and I stumbled to my feet. I ran, and I dared not look back. I dared not slow down. I dared not close my eyes. My breath ran out, yet I kept going. I could feel my body crying out for me to relent or to give in, but I couldn't. I allowed myself a brief look backwards and was faced with a sight I'll never forget. An enormous spider-like leg protruding through the roof of the house shivered and stretched as the house appeared to be pulled down from the inside almost all at once. Black smoke began to spread from where my house had stood only moments ago, but I turned back and I continued to run, and I didn't stop until my body collapsed and I lay losing consciousness in the middle of the road. An older man was the one to come across me, to listen to my incomprehensible cries of monsters, of my home, of my family. He gave me water. He took me to get help. He didn't believe me. Nobody believed me. After some reflection, it's hard to blame them. The bodies were gone. The house lay in ruins. A freak accident, they say. The foundations of the house were unstable. It's amazing the lengths people go to explain things away, especially given the alternative. Time passes, and my resolve falters. The details of my story become shaky. And that's why I'm recording what's left of them here. My wife and son were lost years ago. With each passing day, I become less familiar with the love that we once shared, less certain of the things that I've seen. At first, we thought they were spiders. Now I'm not even sure they were anything at all.
Hey there, kids, and happy Halloween. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode, this Oktoberfest, on the podcast. If you're not listening on the podcast, then you always can listen on the podcast at Spotify, or just about anywhere you find a podcast. And if you're not listening on YouTube, then you can find it on YouTube, or just about anywhere you find a YouTube. If any of you guys are interested in some of the audiobooks or actual books that have horror stories in them that I've worked on, you can always check out that description down below. In there's a couple of different links to some horror books and horror audiobooks and new things, like hopefully there'll be a Tales from the Gas Station Volume 3 link down there in the next few days, which I'm referring to right now, because if you look and it's out, it'll be there. Also, I wanted to say thank you all of you who are supporting me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. If you ever want to help support the show, keep the lights on, feed my cats and the like, you can always head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and you can support the show there. Even $1 is greatly appreciated. And I have a very special thank you to these guys, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Mr. Thud, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Nico, kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Stephen Van Huss, Chance Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G. Weevil 3, The Red Oak Shield Virus, Corey Kenshin, Pothead Holmes, Rival 1, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, The Village Witch, Hades' Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Bradley Lipe, Ann Charan, Acid System, Mike Bullock, Fooly Cooly Dude, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation, Brian Arse, Cryptic Nightmares, Shadow Morningstar, Brianna Wright, Someone You Love, Said the King 56, Bad Honey, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Thomas Burgett, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Last Blade Song, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, and Aaron Stormcrow. And another thank you to all you guys who are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. And I hope you all have a wonderfully happy Halloween. Sweet dreams.